Hey, it's TDA and welcome to episode 11 of this perfect ratio run. If you haven't seen the sneak preview at the end of the last episode, first of all, why didn't you watch until the end? But you might be wondering what we are doing on this massive piece of concrete. And by massive, I do actually mean massive, because if we zoom out, you will see it is really big. I might actually need to fly to show you. This big slab of concrete is what we're going to use for our next build. So it took me a little bit of time to get it right. I think it turned out pretty nice, and what we're going to be building is information matrices, or purple science if you want. We are going to be producing 3 per second, similar to what we've been doing in the previous science builds. And in order to do that, we are going to need a ton of materials and quite a few buildings. So this is not a simple construction, and you will probably need to do some preparing for this. In terms of location, it is very close to where we did the previous build. Actually, it's right next to it. You can see the solar builds and drone builds over there. It's not necessarily a specific reason why I put it here. I thought it was a good place for the size. There was a reasonable amount of ground available here already, but I did have to get some dirt and make sure I actually had enough dirt to actually put in all the sand in the water in order to get enough concrete. A tip for that, by the way, if you go to one of the other planets in this system, if you're playing in the same system as I am, they are mostly covered in sand, so it's a pretty straightforward way of just putting some foundations down there and hoovering up the soil pile in order to be able to build wherever you want on this planet. I'm not actually sure how much I have left. Can I easily check that? I probably can. Let me check. I have way more than I need at this point, so there we go. So 800k still left. I actually only used about 300k, I think, on this specific build. Anyway, let's get to it, because we have a lot to do. In order to produce 3 information matrices per second, we're going to need to build at least 10 for 1 per second, so we need 30 in total in terms of science facilities in order to produce this. We will also need a new type of material that we actually haven't used yet, which in turn will actually require a few other materials that we haven't used yet, and that is the particle broadband, which is constructed from nanotubes, which we haven't built yet, as well as crystal silicon, and this is pretty straightforward to make. However, the nanotubes are a little bit more involved, but we'll get to that. First of all, we are going to need to put down 30 of these, so let's do that. We have a row of 5 over here, so if we stack them up all the way to 6, that should mean we have 5 times 6 is still 30, if my basic math is not abandoning me. And there we go. A nice little tower of not yet, purple science. Now, in order to actually make sure we get that going, we are going to need several things. The first of which is processors, which we're going to take in on this side. And the second thing that we are going to need is the particle broadband, and we're going to have that come in from this side. There we go. So just marking it so I can keep track of it myself. This is going to be processors, and this is going to be broadband. Where is that? It's over there. There we go. Now, we're actually going to need quite a lot of that, so let's check that out. We are going to need to build that over here. Now, let's make sure we actually properly space this out. 1 or 2, I think we can have 2 here. So, there we go, particle broadband. So we're going to need 3 inputs, which is a little bit annoying, but we can deal with that. And since we are going to need a lot of those, so let's do a little bit of math. I'm not going to run you through every step because that will take forever. But since we will need 3 of these per second, as you can see, it's a 1-to-1 ratio, so we also need 3 particle broadbands per second. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but if you look at the recipe, then you see this is actually being produced at 8 per second. So that means we need 8 assemblers for 1 per second, so 24 assemblers just for the broadband in order to get this up and running. Now, in order to avoid 2 long rows, I'm gonna split that up in 2. So we are going to be putting 12 on this side. And we're going to have the input belts on the inside. So this is going to be the inputs. There we go. I hope you're in for a bit of a longer build, because as you can see, we are going to be using a lot of buildings. And then we are going to be putting another 12 on this side. So this is 24 total. Of course, we also need the outgoing belt, so that will nicely tie into there. And because we have half of that on each, we need to make sure it actually connects to the incoming belt for the science facilities before the halfway point, but that's what we've been doing, so that should be fine. Now, we are going to leave 2 rows free in between, so these are just marker rows, but I just need to make sure I get the spacing right. And then what we're going to have over here is a new belt, and that's going to be something like this, and we can connect that up straight over here. And what we're going to do here is produce the nanotubes, so just make sure we have that marked clearly here. This is going to be the nanotubes. There we go. We also need some titanium, so that's going to be over here. And then the third material that we need, sorry, not on titanium, apologies there. What we are going to need is the plastic. Sorry, that's what I meant, plastic. And we are going to need some, what are these called? Crystal silicon. I keep forgetting that. Apologies, not titanium. So this is going to be the plastic. And we are going to need some crystal silicon over here. There it is. Okay, so nanotubes. Nanotubes are not the, actually they are quite complicated, but they are not the most difficult to make necessarily. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a nice row of these over here. There we go. So these are 6. Now, just a little bit of math again. So we need 3 per second for the particle broadband. So we're going to need 6 per second of the nanotubes. And if we check out the nanotube recipe over here, we are producing 2 per 4 seconds. So that means that one building is basically producing 1/2 per second. We just said we need 6, so we need 12 of these. And we have a nice little row of 6. Now, in terms of spacing, remember I pressed tab here a few times. I usually do that with the chemical labs to make sure that they don't conflict with the blueprints. Hopefully you shouldn't have any issues with that this time around. Because I am doing it like that, I do actually need to move them over 1 more space, because otherwise we won't be able to fit in the belt. So let's do that before we move on. There we go. Because we do, actually, let's do it like this. We need a belt to come up here, because otherwise we won't be able to actually connect the other half. So, nanotubes. There we go. This should nicely fit in here. And we need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And now we need to space them out a little bit more, so that they nicely fit in over there. There we go. And then we have the incoming materials. And just checking that out, we have the nanotube recipe over here. We need graphene and we need some titanium. That was the titanium I was talking about earlier. Okay, so spacing that out, putting it in. There we go. And then we need to have the graphene over here, and we're going to need the titanium as well. Now, we're actually going to bring in the titanium from the top side, which is why I was confusing them earlier, and we're going to bring in the graphene from somewhere over here as well. Now, like we said, we need 12 of these, so we are going to put in a second row down here, nicely aligned with the first row. Just making sure I actually put it right up against the belt. Otherwise the symmetry will be gone, and that's not something we would like to see, of course. And actually the symmetry might already be a little bit messed up because of... No, actually no, it should be fine. It just looks like it's jumping, but just as a by the way, when you're building these larger builds, make sure you, actually, let me show it with the blueprint view on because it's easier to distinguish that. Let's take the solar ring as an example. So you can see the equator lines over here, the fault lines. So make sure that you stay in the large middle zone. That's by far the easiest zone to build your larger builds in, and if you try to build some of the blueprints really close to the poles, the second row over here is usually fine, but especially these closer areas, they really get messy when it comes to blueprints, so you will usually either get a very ugly build or it won't be able to be placed there at all. So make sure, generally speaking, that you leave the middle part of the planet for your larger builds. If you have some smaller builds, this is a good area to use, and try to stay out of the pole zones. They are very useful for some of the more polar builds, so to speak. So for example, putting power in there, putting your rail launchers for the solar cells, etc., your launching facilities for the rockets, etc., etc. Put things like that close to the poles. It's actually quite useful in terms of the trajectory towards your Dyson Sphere, etc., but make sure you make the larger builds closer to the middle. Okay, sorry for that interruption, but I thought it was important to note that. Now, outgoing belt. Nanotubes, there we go. Okay, now we need graphene, and we are actually going to need twice as much graphene as we, or not twice as much, but we're going to need slightly more graphene than we did in terms of the amount of buildings. It's again, of course, the chemical facility, and we're going to need 2 rows of that as well. But we are not going to need 12, we're going to need 14 of those. Now, spacing them out exactly like the other ones. We can do it like that. So this is going to be the graphene build. And remember, that needs some graphite as well as some sulfuric acid. Once again, I am just going to assume that you don't have access to rare materials. If you do, you can actually do a little skip here. You can, instead of actually making the acid, you can simply import it from the little ILS over here. But once again, I'm going to assume that you don't have any access to the rare materials. So we are just going to do it the hard way. And to be honest, it's a way that always works, so I tend to call it the better way. But of course, if you do have access to rare materials, feel free to use them. Okay, there we go. That is 14. And then of course we do need to put in a belt to make sure this actually gets to where we need it to go. So this belt is going to go all the way around here, collect all the inputs from the 2 inputs over here, and then collect the final result from over here. It also means we probably want to put in a little bit over here. There we go. And that should take care of that. Now, remember, this needs some acid and it needs some graphite, sorry. So let's mark that up so we don't forget about that. And right, so where do we go next? If we look at this build over here, this is actually interesting. So did we actually put in the outgoing belt? No, so let's actually do that so we don't forget. This is the outgoing belt for the particle broadband, and then we also need to get processors from somewhere, which is actually going to be all the way on the right, but let's make sure we don't forget that. So this is going to be processors, and this is going to be the broadband. Then we also have to get the crystal over here. We have already marked that up, so we should be good on that. And then let's see, we need some plastic, and the plastic is going to come from down here. So what we're going to do is we are going to make this belt go down over here. And then let me make sure I do this right. So in that direction. And yeah, so that actually, you might be oh, let's make sure it actually connects. This is one of the things I always do wrong because of the logic behind the building. Of course, you do want this to move the other way around, otherwise it won't work. There we go. Okay, so what we need to do is make sure that we get all these facilities up and running, and we do need to get our plastic in order. Now, plastic in terms of how much we need. Remember, we needed 6 per second of this. This is the wrong build. We needed 3 per second of this, so we also need only 3 plastic. Now, if you look at the build, let's make sure we space this out evenly. I want it to look ugly, of course. Now do we? There we go. So this is going to be the plastic. 3 per second, so that means we need 9 of these. Now 9 is a little bit annoying when you have 2 rows, because I do want to put those in 2 rows. But we should be fine. I'm actually going to do it like this, so we make sure we keep the spacing the same. So we're going to put 6, 7, 8. Is this 8? Let me make sure I counted that correctly. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we're gonna need one more. There we go. And then we are going to need an almost equal amount of acid. So the acid is going to come from over here. But remember that we needed 9 of these. So this is going to be number 9. There we go. And then down here, this is where the acid is going to be. There you go. And we are going to need only 7 of those. All right. So when we're looking at this, make sure you space them out a little bit once again in order to avoid the conflicts. I'm actually curious if you make a similar build like this yourself. How do you approach that? Do you take a similar line or not? Do you prefer a square type of build? I usually go for the kind of longer builds. Why? Because of the reason that it makes it a little easier to place them, especially keeping in mind once again that you want to keep them in the middle area. Long builds from east to west tend to be a little bit less conflicting with blueprints. So, and of course, since I use a lot of blueprints, that is my main reasoning. But square builds do tend to look kind of nice. So I definitely see a line of reasoning where you could use those. I'm just curious what you guys are using. So let me know. Meanwhile, let's continue this build. We are going to actually put in the plastic on this belt. Now you might be wondering, why are you not using the belt closer? And that is because we are going to be using the area over here. We actually need to connect this titanium. Now we don't actually need that much titanium. We only need about 6 smelters. And let's make sure we get that right. Yeah, I think this should be fine. Okay. So these are the titanium smelters. Let's make sure we mark them as such. There we go. And they will not have any problems connecting to this belt. It's only one little hop away. And that will make sure we get that going there. Now we can actually drop this belt down one line over here to make it look a little neater. So we have the plastic incoming on this belt. And once again, I'm just going to mark it so we keep track of where everything is supposed to go. And this is going to be the titanium. There we go. Okay, that also means, of course, that we actually do need to bring in the titanium from somewhere. So that is going to be from over here. So this belt is going to be for the raw titanium. Now, that covers most of the plastic. Now you might be wondering, hey TDA, you did place down this little facility over here. What's up with that? Because that's not actually going to be connected to the belt. You are right, of course. So I am going to cheat a little bit here and actually connect one small belt like this. And have that hop over there in order to connect to the facilities. Now the reason for this is quite simple. I like the symmetry and I wanted to have 2 equal rows, but of course you could extend the last plastic facility over there rather than doing this with a little bit of a band-aid approach here where we kind of use the thing to hop over there. But it's only going to be connecting one plastic, so there's no delay on this belt whatsoever. I just prefer that over having my symmetry broken. Now, what we need for all of this is actually quite a few things. So this one needs some graphite, whatever you want to call it, as well as oil. And we are going to bring that in, of course. So let's make those belts like this. Now remember that this actually also needs oil, and there should be enough oil on this belt to share between the plastic and the acid, so we have those covered. So that means we only need 2 inputs on the other side for the stone and for the water. And we are going to put that on the other side. Now we are actually going to put that in like this. So this is going to be an input, this is going to be an input, and this is going to be the output. Yes, like that. So if we actually hook this up to enough materials, that should be fine. This is going to be, let's make sure we get it right, because of course the oil actually needs to come in from somewhere as well. But that should be fine. So this is going to be stone, and then this is going to be water. Water, where are you? Over there. Okay, so let me just double check my planning, because of course we don't want to mess this up. We actually do also need to bring in oil. We are going to bring that in from over here, and that is going to wrap around to over there. And that means that we will have oil on this belt over here, and that automatically means that the graphite should be coming from over there. And that, okay, sorry about that, I got distracted there for a moment. Working from home, etc. I'm sure you guys can relate. We actually do need to get this down there and then wrap this around and make sure we have that go in all the way over here and then feed into here, so we can actually supply our graphene production with our graphite. Okay, so this is graphite and this is oil, and the oil stops here, and that is just fine. Okay, remember, this is the little bit of patch that we have the small amount of plastic going on. This is the titanium. So all in all, this should be working pretty well. Okay, depending on your preference, by the way, you could do this like this. It's a tiny thing, but I really hate how these little things look, and this kind of intersection is more to my liking in terms of the visual, but that's up to you. Okay, we had oil on this belt, and that was then correct. Now, what we actually need is a large number of items on these belts, and as you can see, I'm actually importing them from the middle of the build, and that means we are going to be putting in a little supply station over here. Depends a little bit on where you want to put it. You can move it a little bit down if you want. Just make sure you have enough room to actually connect all of this up. Now, of course, you can set this to collect some oil. We will need some water over here. We are also going to require coal over here. And what else did I miss? Oh, the stone. And of course, that leaves one space for warpers, which is definitely important for the later builds. Now, that means that we have the oil over here. That means we have water over here. We can take these two out. Now we can have the stone over there. And remember, if you start building a belt going out, you press tab, you can immediately select the right input, so you don't have to manually do that afterwards. So just to mark it up. Actually, why did I put that on this belt? I set the correct inputs. There we go. There. And then we have the oil on this one. Okay, so that takes care of a large part of our build already. Now we do need to have some, well, not some, quite a lot of smelters actually in terms of the coal. Let me see, we want to be placing it over here, and we are going to be putting in quite a few of these. And we are going to have a belt in the middle. And depending on where you place that, and actually I think I placed it correctly now. Yes, I did. You can have the the coal coming in straight from the middle over there, from the ILS, straight through the middle of these 2 rows of smelters that will be producing the graphite. Now, we actually do need more than 30. This is 30 in total. We will need 33. So what we're actually going to do is we are going to be putting in 1, 2, 3 over here. Sadly, there is no symmetry in an even number, so, but that's not the biggest problem in the world. And of course, then that does mean that we need to put in a outgoing belt over here as well. And we will be doing that like this. Like so. And there we go. And we need another outgoing belt over there, like that. And that should cover that. Now, the maximum number of smelters you can put on a belt, of course, they cannot consume more than 30 items per second. The 30 smelters that we have been placing here, 33 smelters actually, will be consuming more than 30 coal per second. So actually these last 3 smelters will not get supplied, but we can fix that problem by simply adding in a small little belt over here and supplying the first 3 smelters from this side. And that should mean that we are actually outputting exactly enough on these belts to supply all these smelters and make sure they keep producing all the way through. Now, that covers the graphite and all the inputs we need for the plastic. So that fixes a large amount of a build. We also have our titanium, we have our graphene, we have our carbon nanotubes. That means we have exactly 2/3 of the inputs for the first item fixed. Luckily, the last one we need for the particles is not that complicated. We simply need some silicon crystals, and they are very straightforward to make. So I will show you how to do that. We are going to be using exactly 12 of these, and these are going to be producing silicon. And as you can see, this is an exactly a 1-to-1 ratio between silicon and silicon crystals, or crystal silicon. So, well, actually don't want to be producing it here. These ones are going to be producing the basic silicon. And then in order to have a full production, we are going to need exactly the same amount of silicon crystal production over here. So this is going to be that. We can actually put that in straight from the belt. Or at least the inputs are going to go straight from the belt into the crystal. This is going to be the raw material. And then we can connect these straight away, so we don't actually have to put in a separate belt for that. And then we have the crystal silicon coming out over here and going into the build down there. And that should fix that part of our build as well. So as long as we actually supply this with the raw materials, which is going to be, of course, silicon ore, sorry, that should fix that. Now, we still haven't completed our build for the processors, so let's extend this belt a little further. There we go. We are actually going to take that one down there. And once again, let's make sure we do that the other way around. We actually want it to be supplied. There we go. And remember, this is going to be the titanium ore. Just marking that so we keep track what is on what belt. There we go. We can probably bring that down over here. There we go. And do that like that. And then do the same with the silicon ore. So we are giving ourselves some space to work with. Now remember, this is going to be the titanium ore. Is this the titanium ore? No, yes, this is the titanium ore. And this is the silicon ore. There we go. And this is of course our plastic, so this doesn't actually need to be supplied with anything. There we go. Okay, now getting closer. Not entirely there yet, but we're getting closer because now we need to start working on our processors. Now the processors, we've done those a few times now, but we're going to need quite a large number of them now, because we are going to need 18 of the assemblers for the processors, because it's quite processor hungry, actually, this build. There we go. Now, of course, processors need a few things to go in. Not too complicated, just the components as well as the circuit boards. So we need 2 incoming belts in the middle to make sure we can also supply the other half of this build with the processors. And then we are going to need a belt on the outside to connect that up, as well as a belt on this side to actually connect that up as well. And in order to keep the symmetry a little bit, let's just extend that belt over there. Doesn't need to be quite this long though, so this is going to be processors. Where are you? There you are. And the same holds over here. Now, processors, like I said, need components, and they need some circuit boards. So we'll have the components on the top over here. I keep losing track of where everything is. There we go. And then we need the circuit boards over there. Let's cut those in a little bit for now. So that means we are going to be extending this little part with some processors. As you might remember from the previous builds, not processors, the components, we are going to need a lot of those, and we are actually going to need not 18 but 24 of those. So in order to keep that nice and symmetric once again, we are going to be putting in a row of 12 on this side. Did I say, yes, I did say 24, right? Did I say 24? I hope I said 24. Anyway, that is the amount that we need. There we go. So 18 to 24, and that's a large number, of course. Now, not quite done, because we need one more component, and that is the circuit boards. We only need 6 of those because of the high speed we are able to produce them at. Remember, they are being produced at 2 per second. And now we do get a nice little puzzle to do in terms of actually fixing our belts. Because if you remember, some of these resources are actually being shared between the two. Specifically, we will need some iron on one belt. And we are going to need some copper on the other belt. Now, we are also going to make sure that we can actually output, why is this colliding? Output circuit boards on this belt, like so. It's a little annoying sometimes that disappears, because this was the circuit boards. There we go. And that of course means that this one doesn't need to be quite as long. And we are going to be supplying the iron from over on this side. And yes, that is actually going in the right direction, in case you were wondering. Now, we also need copper, and this one also needs copper. So in order to make sure we actually get to do that, we are going to be putting in the copper like this. That will allow us to supply the copper on both sides. And we also need some silicon. So the silicon is actually going to come in from down here, and that's going to be on this belt, and then we have an outgoing belt that can connect all the way straight through to the processors facilities over there. Now, you might be looking at my power and wondering, hey TDA, usually around this time you run out of power, but I'm using now the hydrogen fuel rods from the last build. And you can see they actually charge your mech up quite a lot faster than coal and other resources do. And that has everything to do with the fact that in the fuel chamber you get a 200% bonus. It's a way more efficient way to keep your mech powered. So if you haven't built it yet, I highly suggest that you do. It's just very convenient to have that going like that. Okay, getting there. We are actually going to tuck a little ILS. Well, maybe a little is not the correct word, but you have the room to tuck it in over here. Now we might want to rearrange that belt at some point. As you can see, this will allow us to bring in the most important resources. Assuming, of course, that we set them up. So we need some titanium, we need some silicon. We are also going to need some iron, and we're going to need some copper. And then once again, that leaves one space for warpers. And we are going to bring that in like this. And like that. So that will have that fixed. And then, of course, we do need to make sure that we get everything else going. First of all, we are going to need some smelters for the iron. Not that many. We only need about 12, I think. Yes. There we go. Iron. There we go. Like that. Once again, you do need to be a little bit careful with how you put in your sorters, because remember, we also need the inputs from this last smelter to actually go into the iron facility or into the circuit boards over there. So that means that if you pull it from the last bit of the belt like so, and you put it in like so, that should be fine. Just something to be aware of if you're making these larger builds, that if you're not careful, you can sometimes mess up your ratios because the sorters are in the wrong order on the belt. Not usually a huge problem, but make sure you're aware of what you're doing with that. Okay, now of course we do need to make sure this actually gets the raw resource in as well, and that should be fixed like that. So that means that we have the raw iron over here, and we have the iron over there. And remember, this was the output belt for the circuit boards. Now, copper. We are actually going to need a little bit more copper than we need iron, but not that much more. So this is a row of 12, 15, and we are actually going to be putting in another row, so 18 over there. I thought I already had it set to copper. I didn't, so let me just do it like this. Okay, that should make all the copper facilities going. And once again, we need to make sure we have the raw materials going in, and we are going to be pulling those from over here. And like I said, we probably need to rearrange the belts there at some point, but that should not be a problem. And we're going to do that like that. So why are we going to do it like that? Because we do need the input belt, sorry, the output belt over here for the copper to go in all the way like this, and then all the way up there. And that means that if we don't want those to overlap, this is an easy way to do it, and I think it looks quite neat doing it like this. And remember, this is the outgoing belt for the copper on these two sides. And otherwise you have an issue getting the raw materials in between the last two lines, and this again preserves our symmetry, and we do like our symmetry, don't we? Okay, now almost done. Almost. Because we actually still have to fix our silicon production, and we are going to need quite a few silicon smelters. We are going to need not just one row, not two rows, but let me make sure I actually get the spacing right. There we go, because we will have an outgoing belt over here. And let me sort this out, because this of course is not going to work like we want it to. That can go over there. And once again, I really find that ugly, so I might fix that in a moment, but for now, let's stick with this. And that goes all the way up there. Remember, these are smelters for silicon. There we go. This is actually not going to do either, because we are going to need to wrap those around a little bit. Because we actually want to fit in one more. There. Now we're actually going to move that one down there. So we have a little bit extra space, and we fix the problem of that ugly connection there. And there we go. And we are going to take in a second row of this. And then we are going to put in a third row of that. And that is a lot of smelter. So we will actually need a second belt of silicon ore, and actually in order to make sure this is actually being supplied sufficiently enough. There we go. And that will go in the middle over there. And then last but not least, we will have this belt connecting all the way up there. So remember, this is the outgoing belt. This is the incoming belt with the ore. Then we have another incoming belt with ore over here. And then finally we have the last outgoing belt on this side. If you were paying close attention, you might have wondered, well, TDA, you have copper on this side, but you don't actually have the copper up there, and you would be right. The way we are going to fix that is actually quite simple. We are going to make use of this little space over here. I'm actually almost out of belts. And we're going to flip that around like this. And basically what we're going to do is do it a little bit like this. This is going to hop over here and hop over here. We don't actually need that much copper to go on this belt in the back, but we do need a little bit more. Now, I actually just ran out of belts. I just had a little bit less than I needed, so be right back while I get those. And I will also use that time to sort out all the sorters, get everything connected up, etc, etc. And then we'll meet back here to kind of review the final product. Be right back. Alrighty, and there we are. As you can see, our purple science production is up and running. We're actually not doing anything with it yet because we still have to build a science hub in order to process it, but it is up and running, and I am going to show you a few things. Hey, we got a milestone as well. That's nice. As you can see, we have the awesome line of processors coming in over here. We have the particle broadband coming in over here. Difficult sentence apparently. I did have to switch something around because I will never learn that you cannot actually put 3 inputs on the inside of a building that actually also needs 3 inputs if you want to get them from both sides, because you will run into the issue of the sorters conflicting with each other, because of course you need 3 on one side and then you only have 2 spaces left on the other side. So I fixed that by moving the the processor belt one out, the particle broadband belt as well, and then just wrapping the crystal silicon around like this, so we only have to draw it in on this side from over here, and we can draw it in from the other side over there. So that fixes that problem. As you can see, we have a nice amount of particle broadband already being produced. Initially I got stuck a little bit on the processors because I put in the wrong input over here, so this was actually copper rather than iron, but I fixed that of course, and that should be working as well. As you can see, we have a nice amount of influx of items coming in over here. Now I did cheat a little bit and I did actually use drones. Why? Because we have so little copper in our system that we don't actually have more than 2 sources of copper outside of our main planet. And therefore, because this is also in the middle of a installation, I'm just requesting copper from over here on this side, where I do have the copper going into this ILS, and this ILS is just bringing them over with some drones. It's a very short flight, it's very efficient, and we will probably get rid of that as soon as we get access to another system where we actually can get the copper from directly, rather than having it vary in between of these 2 ILSs. Anyway, that works for now. I put in, of course, a nice purple lining around our concrete, so we know this is the purple science production. We don't never have to look for it. We can easily spot it even from outer space. And I also built a few water facilities in order to get that supply going, as well as I tapped into the oil that happened to be over here, as well as some coal, I believe. Yes, we actually had some coal over here as well, so might as well use that. We are going to need a lot of it, so I really like draining the core planet of all the resources, so we used up all the resources on our home planet. Also gives you a little bit of room. You can remove all the spaghetti in terms of the belts eventually, rather than doing it by drones. You can also use drones, of course. That is up to your preference. Either way, yeah, I think this is a pretty nice build. It's nice and compact. There is a lot of symmetry going on over here. We have a lot of different items being used, and it all results in an awesome production. As you can see, we're almost up to full speed now. An awesome production of information matrices, or purple science if you prefer. All right. That was it for this episode. We have a lot of research to do in terms of purple science, and I will use the next episode as a kind of a placeholder episode, maybe you could say, to kind of get some basics going, because producing all these research is not going to be of any use if we don't, if we're actually going to struggle putting it to use. We want to make sure we have all our buildings accessible to us wherever we are in the world, so we need a better mold to do that, and we also need to put in a science hub like I just explained. I have a very nice build for that that you might have seen before. It's not new necessarily, but it's very nice, so if you haven't seen my previous playthrough, that will be exciting as well. So 2 new builds coming up on the next episode. Alright, I hope to see you there. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. And if you want, please also leave a like on this video. Again, really helps me out. And it's a nice way of saying thank you that doesn't cost you anything. Alright, catch you in the next one.